There's a Harvard brain scientist, her name is Dr. Jill Bolt, and she said that 90 seconds is all it takes to identify an emotion and simply allow it to dissipate. Somebody comes in the room and they trigger you. Did you finish that report? And you're like, oh my God, we just talked about this yesterday. Like, why are you bugging me about the report? And you got 6 seconds. And then another 84 seconds for the emotion to completely dissipate. And how do you do that? Well, according to this Harvard neuroscientist, Dr. Jill Bolt, what you do is you name the emotion. You know, Tom, I'm a little frustrated. You name the emotion. I'm a little upset that you're asking me about the report again, because we just talked about this yesterday. But let me give you the update. And as you're doing that, do you know what happens is the emotion begins to dissipate. Hey everybody, welcome back to our next episode where we're continuing our conversation around creating healthy workplace culture. Here at Flourishing Workplace, our mission is changing the world by changing the workplace. And so we've been having this discussion about toxic workplaces versus healthy workplaces. And we've discovered that the ultimate solution to a toxic workplace is creating a flourishing workplace. And so we've been breaking down the 10 traits of people who create a flourishing workplace culture, because it's all about the people. And so what are the traits of people who create that flourishing workplace culture? We saw in our last episode, the first one, which is personal empowerment. And now we want to move into our second trait of people who create a flourishing workplace culture. And that is personal awareness and personal management. Now, there's a philosopher, Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who said, I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. Now, there's a whole other quote where he talked about being the weather and that he can impact people and all of those things. And it's actually, as an organizational leader, it's actually true. You have an unbelievable impact on the people around you. You have an unbelievable impact on their performance. But I love the first part of his quote because he says this. He says, I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. I am the decisive element. I think for some of you, that would be a great mantra to begin saying. Because I know for myself, that is a wonderful mantra that I've been using for myself now for a few years. Because I used to say, I didn't say this out loud, but I can be honest with you and say that my own mantra was I suck, I don't have any power, I don't have any opportunity to change, I'm never going to get anywhere. And, you know, that is just kind of lame, like, you know, and you have that mindset, it's not going to lead to a healthy workplace. And so you begin to shift that thinking process and that mantra to I am the decisive element. And so today what we're going to talk about is personal awareness. We're going to talk about personal management. How can you manage you? Because so many of us are trying to manage our business, we're trying to manage our relationships, we're trying to manage our finances, and we're trying to manage our kids. But I think that a lot of the time what we got to do is we got to manage ourselves. And if I want to put this into the lens of the workplace, ask yourself this question. What impact could heaviness have on you in the workplace? I don't mean like physical heaviness. I mean like emotional heaviness. What impact could sadness have on you and the workplace? What impact could hopelessness have on you in the workplace? What impact could despair have on you in the workplace? What impact could you and I not learning how to emotionally regulate have not just on ourselves, but also the team around us and the work environment? That's why what we're going to do today is we're going to talk for a little bit in this episode about emotional regulation. Now, did you know that in kind of today's society and absolutely in social media, it's almost like there's an infrastructure in social media and modern society that is committed to keeping us in crisis. It's absolutely committed. And our emotions are constantly at this high state of alert because we're constantly tapping into environments on our phone and in society that keep us in that place of constant crisis. And what ends up happening when I'm in crisis and when you're in crisis, that doesn't bring us closer together. If it's our constant current state, it actually causes us to push each other away from each other. And a little thought experiment, if you don't believe me, I mean, if you're married or you're living with somebody, you're in kind of committed relationship, or you have a best friend, just think about the last time both of you were like really in crisis, and unpack how many of those times it pulled you apart rather than it brought you together. Yeah, okay, sure. Sometimes there's that once in a lifetime crisis that pulls you together. But most of the time what happens with crisis is we get insular because we're trying to figure out how to deal with our own stuff in that crisis. And they're trying to figure out how to deal with their own stuff in that crisis. And now we have two of us kind of pulling away, trying to deal with their own stuff. And what ends up happening is we end up going further and further apart. And when we don't learn how to properly emotionally regulate, what ends up happening is we then don't have any ability to navigate our emotional highs and lows. So not only do we isolate ourselves, but we have these emotional highs and lows that are happening, and we can't really find a way to emotionally regulate ourselves, to keep ourselves in a solid, progressive, happy, healthy rhythm. And, and that was the environment, all of the environment sort of before COVID came. And then even Johns Hopkins University, they found that COVID-19 lowered emotional wellness and emotional regulation by a staggering 74%. And when your emotional wellness goes down, you don't feel happy, you don't feel healthy, you don't feel holistically balanced. When your emotional wellness still goes down, your stress goes up, your depression goes up, your anxiety goes up, your physical health goes down. And so, this idea of emotional regulation is really, really, really important. Now, what is emotional regulation? Emotional regulation is not suppressing your feelings. It is not burying your feelings and locking them up in the deepest, darkest place. That is not emotional regulation. It's not suppressing. It's not repressing. It's not compressing. Emotional regulation is when your emotions are frankly outside of the zone of your control. Now, I am not suggesting for 1 second that you can control necessarily what you feel in the moment, but you can absolutely control whether that emotion then becomes the defining emotion of your life, or if you regulate that emotion so that you can get back to a place of emotional wellness. And often I try to explain this to people using a little bit of time differentials. So I want you to think for a moment the difference between 6 seconds, 90 seconds, and 20 minutes. Okay, it should be easy to see the difference between those things. You got 6 seconds, 90 seconds, and 20 minutes. Did you know that it takes the chemicals that are released during an amygdala hijack 6 seconds only to dissipate, unless you ramp it up? And so I want you to think about this. If you ever get into an amygdala hijack, what that means is somebody comes in the room and they trigger you and they maybe hurt you and get you into a panicked or depressed, a place where you're feeling fight, flight, or freeze. And we've all been there. Often we can't control when that happens. I totally admit that. But if we will just weather the storm of that 6 second emotional burst, that burst of adrenaline, take a breath, focus on something else, allow your mind to clear and your mindset to evolve to, rather than think about the current crisis, think about something else. Did you know that those emotions after 6 seconds will actually begin to dissipate? That doesn't mean that they'll go away right away, but that emotional intensity will go low. But if you run with and roll with that 6 second emotional burst, I can promise you things aren't going to get better. They're going to get worse. Now, there's a Harvard brain scientist. Her name is Dr. Jill Bolt, and she said that 90 seconds is all it takes to identify an emotion and simply allow it to dissipate while you notice it. So imagine somebody comes in the room, and I want you to now put this together, 6 seconds, 90 seconds. Somebody comes in the room and they trigger you because hey, did you finish that report? And you're like, oh my God, we just talked about this yesterday. Like, why are you bugging me about the report? And you got 6 seconds. And then another 84 seconds for the emotion to completely dissipate. And how do you do that? Well, according to this Harvard neuroscientist, Dr. Jill Bolt, what you do is you name the emotion. You know, Tom, I'm a little frustrated. You name the emotion. I'm a little upset that you're asking me about the report. Again, because we just talked about this yesterday. But let me give you the update. And as you're doing that, do you know what happens is the emotion begins to dissipate. Now, what happens in a lot of workplaces, we're talking about workplaces, we're talking about no more toxic workplace culture, we're talking about creating a healthy workplace culture, is that 6-second thing. People don't follow that. They let the energy ramp up. And then the 90-second thing, that now that 90-second thing can't even kick in because the next 90 seconds is about escalating the emotion rather than allowing the emotion to dissipate. You know, for many years, I was the director of programs of the largest homeless shelter in North America. And you can imagine we would see 12, 13, 1,400 people a night. I had baseball bats pulled on me, knives, and all kinds of weapons. And just because people would come in often hepped up on substances, whatever they were using that day, or, you know, whatever was going on in their life, and they're all in a stressed out state. And it was constantly a challenge to de-escalate situations. I mean, if somebody comes in and they say, can I have a sandwich? And you say, well, we ran out of sandwiches a half hour ago. And then they pull out a baseball bat and threaten your life. You got two choices. You can either take your chances with the guy with the baseball bat, or you can de-escalate the situation. How would you de-escalate the situation? They're all upset. I just need a sandwich, man. Don't you get it? And you can see all of a sudden they're triggered because they're just hungry. There's nothing wrong with being hungry. And yet maybe the substances that they were using, or maybe the alcohol or whatever, and now they're angry. And you're like, hey man, I ran out of sandwiches a half hour ago, and now they're ready to like take your life because they just need a sandwich. And then you get all personal and you're like, oh, you think you can take me, man? You know, or I'm going to call the cops or security. I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things. You know what I discovered so many times was just like, okay, hey man, I get it. You're hungry. I'm going to go inside and I'm going to find you something. May not be a sandwich. Like I said, we ran out a half hour ago, but I'm going to go from floor to floor. I'm going to go from fridge to fridge. I'm going to find you something, man, because you're hungry and everyone's got a right to eat. And as soon as you would say that, guess what? Their emotion would go down. Your threat response would go down. But you don't see that often in the workplace today. Somebody comes in, Tom's like, hey man, did you finish the report? And you're like, Tom, you jerk. I just told you that I finished the report. And now both of you are escalating. And both of you are experiencing the emotional toll of unregulated emotion. Now, hey, if that's you, I empathize with you. You know, that's why creating a flourishing workplace is kind of difficult, because the workplace isn't like the system. It's not the spreadsheets. It's not the software. It's the people. And we are not AI. We are not robots. We're not like 3D printed. We are imperfect, that we have emotions. We have good days. We have bad days. We have good moments and we have bad moments. And so what I would suggest is the next time you get triggered, there's an event that happens and you get triggered, take that 6-second rule and just don't say anything for 6 seconds. Put your mind on something else. And then recognize, okay, I got another 90 seconds to name the emotion, to let that emotion fade. And you know what? That's where 20 minutes comes in, because that fight or flight response within about 20 minutes, the neuroscientists tell you, is all it takes, just 20 minutes to completely calm down psychologically. So when I understand 6 seconds, 90 seconds, and 20 minutes, I can choose and intentionally walk myself through from that triggering event where I want to pick up the desk and throw it at Tom to, okay, I just need 20 minutes. You know, not the end of the world. And you might say, well, dude, like, what does this all have to do with the workplace? Please, friends, it has everything to do with the workplace, because we have workplaces where people are pulling their hair out because they can't seem to regulate their emotions. Now, I'm not saying they're to blame. You know, just like the homeless guy that I would work with who would want to threaten my life because I didn't give him a sandwich. It wasn't my fault for telling him the truth. But at that moment when he got upset with me, I could either escalate or de-escalate. That part was on me. And I couldn't, if I chose to escalate, I couldn't blame him. Well, you threatened me and I'm going to escalate back. No. One of us has to be the bigger human. Maybe a better way to put that is one of us has to be the more mentally healthy individual. And the mentally healthy individual says, okay, yep, I would be well within my rights to escalate, but right now is not the time. I'm going to de-escalate. And imagine if people did that. Now listen, I have the benefit of being a little older than I used to be. And when I was younger, I was great at escalating. You rubbed me the wrong way, I'd rub you back. You said something nasty to me, I'd say something nasty to you back. What I began to discover is this concept. People hear, Jesus said, turn the other cheek, and people are like, oh, only weak people do that. You know what I've discovered is it's way weaker to slap the cheek of the person who slapped you. That takes nothing to just slap back. That's not courage. That's actually weakness. What's a lot harder is I could slap you back, but I'm going to regulate my emotions right now. I'm going to allow this situation to de-escalate. And I tell you what, for me, maybe for you too, this is a constant learning. What makes this learning easier? In other words, what are some very practical things that we can do to help us emotionally regulate? Well, can I encourage you, number one, pay attention to the amount of sleep you get. This is really important. When you are exhausted, how many of you know you are like an emotional fuse ready to blow? Do you know what I mean? Like you're like, and that's just because when you're tired, you're irritable. Not because you're a bad person, you're just exhausted. Even with our kids, like I'm the beautiful, I have the beautiful privilege of being a father to 4 kids. And right now we have an 8-month-old baby, and he's so great. He's got such a warm and happy go lucky nature. But when he's tired, he's like a different human. I'm like, who took over my little beautiful boy? And he's the same guy, but what does he need? He just needs a nap. That's it, like just a nap. So I think that's one thing that some of us can do to help us better emotionally regulate. The second thing is better nutrition. Did you know that there's a lot of chemicals in food today? I mean, we all know that. But some of those chemicals actually keep you hepped up emotionally. And, I'm a big fan of caffeine. I think caffeine is fine. But one of the downsides of caffeine is that it keeps you at a heightened state. So some high performance coaches actually say, use more caffeine. And to some degree, that's true. But then you have to be willing to also take care of the downside, the threat side of caffeine. And that is, you might be a little more reactive. So don't. Make sure you have lots of fruits, lots of vegetables. Make sure your blood sugar levels are stable. Make sure that you don't have all these highs and all these lows emotionally, because one second you're eating a cheesecake, and then the next second you don't eat anything. And then the next moment after that, you have a big bowl of ice cream, and then you don't eat anything else for 3 days. Well, of course, your emotions are going to be up and down like a toilet seat because you don't have any nutrition. Third thing I found, and in my life, probably the thing that is the greatest emotional regulator in the moment for me is exercise. I can't tell you how many times I've been tired or angry or stressed or just kind of lonely and sad. And what I'll do is I'll go and tap into the unbelievable power of the human body to help regulate the emotion. I don't even know how it works, but we understand from the science that when we start to work up a sweat, when our blood levels, our heart levels begin to elevate, not too much, but just enough, when this is happening, we activate more hemoglobin. We activate all of those healthy hormones like dopamine and all of the endorphins, all of the feel-good chemicals. And so you can either sit and stew in your misery, or you can go exercise. And so sometimes, even when I've been on the job, I'm like, I'm going to take my lunch break right now. And like this second, and I'll go for a walk. Because if I don't take my lunch break, the other alternative is I might choke somebody. And I don't want to do that. And so it's unbelievable, the power of exercise. You know what? You can regulate your emotions. You don't have to be the victim of your emotions. And that's why the second trait of people who create a flourishing workplace culture is personal awareness, personal management. Because when I walk around thinking I'm the victim of my emotions, guess what? I am not going to be a good contributor to positive workplace culture. But when I recognize I have to manage my highs and lows emotionally, I'll tell you what, everything begins to change. And so at Flourishing Workplace, we actually believe in workplaces where everyone thrives, everyone belongs, and everyone contributes. And so what are your next steps? Well, please go to flourishingworkplace.com, book a discovery session. We'll give you a detailed roadmap, and we won't leave you alone, but we'll walk you through to implement that roadmap. And again, that's flourishingworkplace.com. We'll see you in our next episode. Thanks for tuning in.